concerned that perhaps he may not be allowed to come in to Canada. And I'll tell you what happened. He explained to me. He said that this happened 36 years ago. He was in the Black Panther Party offices, and an American policeman came, and he obviously, there was, I'm sure you're aware that there was a program in the United States which was called COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program, which incidentally is still going on. I mean, if you want to read about it, there's actually a book called COINTELPRO. And this was deliberately a program set up by the FBI in order to target the Black Panther Party, in order to delegitimize them, because they were going around providing breakfast to disadvantaged children and doing all kinds of other social work. But they had to target them to eliminate them. So this police officer who came into their office, and he was assaulting an African-American sister. And so Phil, as an upright person, he stood up and he told the officer that you cannot do that. And of course, you know, a scuffle broke out. Not that he had assaulted the police officer, but you know the way the police works. They beat you up and they say, he assaulted me. So that's what happened to Phil. And of course, he was charged, and later on the charge was dismissed in court. But unfortunately, you know, in the system that they have in North America, everything is integrated, so they have all the information about you. If you ever try to go to the U.S., you give them your name and they know immediately who you are. They know everything, who your father is, your mother is, who your grandmother is, and where you were born, and where your great-grandfather was buried. They have all that information. So, you know, I mean, this is how, they call this a free society. I mean, this is how free it is. It's completely wired. So, of course, when they punched Phil's name, they found out that he had a conviction 36 years ago. Although that conviction was thrown out in court, and yet they said, well, you know, there is a conviction against you, so you have to come in for some questioning. And of course, he was bringing some books as well, his books, the book that he has written in defense of Iran. And for that, of course, you know, anytime you want to bring anything to Canada, the tax man wants his cut, you see. So he had to pay his tax, but the more serious issue was this aspect of this so-called conviction. But luckily, the officer who was dealing with this thing, he said, well, look, you know, I understand. This has been 36 years ago, and I believe what you say, that it's been thrown out. But you can see how tightly controlled the whole system is. So anyway, we are glad that Phil made it. He's been actually driving for 2 days. He set out last night from Richmond, Virginia. And you see, we are glad that he made it to Richmond Hill, Ontario. So he just arrived about, I guess, 7 o'clock or so at the hotel, quickly changed, and he got here. He hasn't even had dinner yet. But we are grateful that he decided to come here to share his thoughts with us. And after he speaks, of course, you know, we will have Cynthia speak to us. But in the meantime, Phil is going to share his thoughts. And also, as I mentioned, we have his book, In Defense of Iran, available here. The normal price is $18.95, but it'll be available for $10. I think it's a good bargain. You can take it, give it as gifts to somebody, and you know, you can get it. And perhaps, hopefully, Phil would be happy to autograph it for you. So, would you please welcome Phil Wilayto?
The last time I came up, there was no problem at all. I spoke over at Hamilton and McMaster, but this time, the fellow the first person I talked to, you know, I was trying to drive through, and he says, so where are you going? I'm going to Richmond Hill. And he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm giving a lecture. He said, on what? I said, media relations. And he said, and where is the lecture going to be? And I said, at the Islamic Center of Metropolitan County of York. And he said, really? He said, why did they invite you to speak there? I mean, I'm in the car, you know, waiting to, everybody's piled up behind me. I said, well, I wrote a book. He said, on what? I said, on Iran. He said, what's the name of it? I says, it's In Defense of Iran, Notes from a U.S. Peace Delegation Journey Through the Islamic Republic. And he looked at me. I said, I'm trying to stop a war. And he thought about that a second, then he said, good luck. So that was we got through that day. I did write a book. Several years ago, some Iranian-American friends of ours in Washington, D.C., convinced us that some of us in Richmond, Virginia, who belong to a community organization that's called the Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality. That's primarily African-American and works on issues of dealing with jobs, housing discrimination, police brutality, and also war issues. We've always been involved in the anti-war movement. And a friend of ours who was Iranian-American said, you know, you should visit Iran. All these terrible things are being said about Iran, and they want to start a war. You should go over there and see for yourself, and then come back and tell people. Well, I thought he was going with us. So we said, sure. So we recruited some people and, you know, did some fundraising. And at the last minute, Rostam said, no, he wasn't going at all. We were going by ourselves. So we went, and if people are familiar with Iran, you know, we had just a lovely time, embarrassingly beautiful time. It was almost like a vacation, and it was supposed to be this, you know, this journey through this, you know, foreboding, dangerous country, where everybody walks up to you and says, "Oh, how are you? Thank you for visiting Iran. We're not terrorists." And came back, and I actually did a lot of speaking engagements just about my trip. You know, Iran from the point of view of an American, a U.S. citizen, and along with these Iranian-American friends who knew a great deal more about all of the technical issues and the political issues. And after a while, it started to sink in, and it seemed to be a good idea to write a book. I should point out that all the proceeds from the book go to support the work in Richmond. It's all volunteer, and so, you know, we're not going to get rich off of this. We're going to stay poor, as a matter of fact. But I think you might like the book. What I was asked to speak about tonight was media myths about Iran, and of course there are many. There's about 5 major ones that you can just guarantee will be brought up in almost any media representation. One is that Iran is supposedly run by a group of religious fanatics who are very dangerous, don't care about life, and wouldn't mind going to war, that they're trying to develop nuclear weapons, and if they did develop nuclear weapons, they would be likely to use them against Israel, which they supposedly have said should be wiped off the map. The president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, is supposed to have said that there was no Holocaust, that Iranian government supports terrorism, and that it represses its own people. I think that's pretty much the package that comes out. And so the book tries to answer those questions, and I'm going to just, you know, we could spend hours and hours discussing those, but I'm going to hit those briefly. But I thought, you know, it would be remiss to go right to the subject of Iran without first mentioning the media and Egypt, because I thought it was so fascinating over the last couple of days. I mean, we have the privilege of having, you know, the ability to watch on Al Jazeera and PressTV and other international sources a popular uprising that's unfolding before our very eyes of millions of people. Nothing like this has happened on this scale since the 1979 revolution in Iran. It's absolutely unbelievable. And what has been fascinating to me is watching how Washington has tried to deal with this. And as Washington tries to deal with this, how that effort is reflected in the news media. So first of all, supposedly out of nowhere, that's what they're saying. I'm not sure that's so true. I think they know that, you know, the people throughout the Arab world are unhappy with most of their rulers, and particularly those that are subservient to the U.S. That's a humiliating situation to be in, and then when you see the corruption and the arrogance and the poverty of the people, I think they must have some idea that people were not particularly happy. But when the demonstrations first started, they did seem to catch Washington a little off guard, and so, you know, first there was a little bit of hesitation to characterize them one way or the other. When there were protests after the 2009 election in Iran, it didn't take 30 seconds for the United States to jump in and support politically. And when demonstrations happening on exactly the same issue broke out in Honduras to protest a U.S.-backed coup of a democratically elected progressive government, there was almost total silence. So you can usually tell who's good and who's bad by who Washington likes and doesn't like. I mean, it's a good rule of thumb to start off with. We're rarely cheering the same people and condemning the same people. So after the demonstration started to get a little momentum quickly, and then they just exploded in size, and the president of Tunisia had already fled to Saudi Arabia. Then President Obama starts talking about the legitimate demands of the Egyptian people, and of course we are sympathetic with these demands and their cries for democracy and free elections. And it seems so ironic, since for 30 years the U.S. government has been propping up the dictator Hosni Mubarak by sending $1.5 billion a year to his military. Now, it's incredibly important because Egypt is the biggest, has the largest population of any Arab country. It has the largest military, was the first country to sign a peace treaty with Israel, and is the linchpin of U.S. Policy in dividing the Arab world and in order to maintain its hegemony over the Middle East and its natural resources, which is the only real issue as far as the U.S. is concerned. They don't care about dictators. They don't care about Democrats. All they care about is the money. You protect the money. You can be a Democrat. You can be a dictator. You can be Satan himself. It doesn't matter, as long as the profits flow to the U.S. corporations. But now they got a little problem, see, because everybody knows they were supporting Mubarak. So they've got to, well, Mubarak should go, sort of, at some point. Maybe, so long as there is a peaceful, structured, orderly transition to the new democracy. In other words, so long as we can control it. That's the issue, see? And meanwhile, while they're trying to figure out what to do, the Army's trying to figure out what's it going to do too, The Army, geez, if Mubarak gets overthrown, we want to be on the winning side. This is, there's a lot of talk about Egyptian army being unique and part of the people and defending the sovereignty, and there is a particular history there. But it's also the army that enforces the blockade against Gaza. It's also the army that withdrew itself from conflicts, any potential conflicts with Israel. It's an army that basically has supported the regime, but not so much that it wants to go down with it. So as the movement shift and changed, the media shift and change. 4 or 5 days, 6 days into the uprisings, the Egyptian people were the heroes of the world. They're fighters for democracy, and they're standing there up against the terror of the police, and that's wonderful. And then Mubarak doesn't go, and the demonstrations become larger. And then the workers start to go out on strike, and the service workers on the Suez Canal start to go on strike, and the next step might be that the Suez workers who run the canal might go on strike, and then it's not so fun anymore. And then we're talking about the possibility of chaos and anarchy in the streets, and a little bit of a, hey, you guys, peaceful protest is all fine and good, but, don't go any further, because we got to have a structured, rational transition to democracy that we can control. So with every twist and turn of the struggle, the U.S. government adopted a slightly different stance, and that was reflected almost immediate in the news media. And now they're not quite sure what to do. I mean, They can't condemn everything that they've supported over the last 30 years. They can't endorse a popular uprising, and they're really worried that there may not be this peaceful transition. So it's still very much an unfolding situation, and we can only hope that that the Egyptian people will continue to show the courage, the resiliency, the intelligence, the strategy, the organizing skills that they have shown up to this point, and that they eventually will be successful, not only in changing the faces in government, but in changing that government itself. Now about Iran. When we first went over to